Before our next candidate comes up to stage, by way of introduction, I'm going to play a short video clip that he asked for us to play.
This is Gary Burgess, candidate for Superintendent of Education in South Carolina. I am calling on all our communities, particularly men, since the issue of firearms in our culture centers around males, boys, teens, and adults, to stand up for our families and communities, to teach young people how to interact with each other in a safe and sensible way in conflict resolution, and to treat firearms with respect. I'm calling this initiative safe, sensible, actionable firearm education. This is what I'm asking. 1, to settle conflict in a manner where firearms are not used. 2, to model civility. 3, to help our young boys and men have a sense of hope and usefulness. 4, to teach firearm safety. 5, to push for proper firearm ownership. This is a community issue, not a school issue. Therefore, all society, the faith community, law enforcement, fraternal orders, sororities, activist organizations, our political parties need to be involved in this effort. The families of gun violence in Uvalde, Texas, and across this country deserve safe, sensible, actionable firearm education. This carnage has to stop, and we can stop it. I'm calling on men to come together across every political, ethnic, racial, religious line to make sure that our communities are safe. Let's take action while we pray. May God bless those who have been touched by gun violence in Uvalde, Texas, and across this great nation and in the state of South Carolina. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
There is a destiny that makes us brothers and sisters. None goes this way alone. All that we send into the lives of others will certainly come back into our own. I am Gary Burgess, candidate for State Superintendent of Education on the Democratic ticket. I want you to understand that democracy is on the ballot June 14th. Our American democracy cannot thrive or survive without an educated citizenry. And education for every child in the state is a human right. We have to fight to take education back from the extreme right and recenter education where it ought to be. If we're not willing to fight, if we're not willing to stand up, then we're going to lose universal public education in this state. Derek Black, professor of law, the University of South Carolina, Columbia, writes a book that you all need to read called Schoolhouse Burning. And in that book, he says what we know and what my research has confirmed is that there is a systematic effort in this state and across this country to dismantle universal public education. I know I look a lot older than I am, but let me give you a fact. My first 4 years in school was at a segregated black school in Edmond, South Carolina called Bethune. We were underfunded, we were underrated, and we were counted to be out of the game. But in those 4 years, from a mom who was not married, who gave birth to me, in those 4 years, those teachers did not ask us what side of the track we were from, how educated our parents were, because they knew our parents were not educated. In those 4 years, I learned to read, I learned to write, I learned to do arithmetic. The church I grew up in, I thought those folk were college educated, but I found out that my mother had the highest degree in that church. It was a high school diploma. But we had to stand up every Easter and say an Easter speech. And y'all remember that? And the Easter speeches out here. We had to pray. We had to sing on the choir. We had to say Christmas speeches. We had to get up and we had to speak. Folk think I got my speaking skills from Wofford College. I did not. I did not get it from the University of Converse University, where I taught as an adjunct professor. I did not get it from the University of South Carolina, Columbia, where I earned my doctorate. I learned to speak in that church. When we desegregated the schools, I could compete at Emmons Elementary School because I was well educated. I'm sick and tired of folks saying that you cannot educate poor children. You cannot educate poor black children, poor Hispanic children, poor white children. We can educate everybody if we want to educate everybody. Yes, I am a product of the public school system in Emmons, South Carolina, Chapman High School, a Wofford College grad. I graduated from Converse University now, where I also did adjunct work as a professor, the University of South Carolina, Columbia. I am a certified teacher. I am a certified district superintendent. I am on the Board of Education in Anderson County. I've worked in suburban schools, such as Dorman High School. I've worked in urban schools, such as Whitlock Junior High School. I have worked in schools that were majority, minority, whatever they were. We worked in those schools. We found a way to engage parents. I was on an ERT, an external review committee, when I went to Allendale, South Carolina. And what I found in Allendale is that those parents, what you see making up your beds at the beach, they were leaving Allendale early in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, to go and make up beds for us. And then we were thinking, we want these parents to be engaged. And parent engagement in Allendale, South Carolina looks a lot different than parent engagement in Greenwood, South Carolina. Those parents were engaged. They wanted the very best for their kids. In fact, the year we went down under Inez Tannenbaum's administration, there was a young man who received a admission to Harvard University. Did y'all hear about that? There were also folk in that school in the JROTC program, the naval program. In that program, they were one of the best naval JROTC programs in the state. What we do, we make an assumption. We make an assumption that public education is not good. When I was teaching at a high school, I went into the lounge my first 2 days of school, and I stopped going to the teacher's lounge because everything they said was negative about the administration, negative about the kids, negative. And I decided I did not want to be a negative teacher. They took those same ideas out into the public, and then the public then turns around and they will say public schools are no good. I've got news for you. Charter schools are all right. Private schools are great. If you want your kid to go to a religious school, I'm all for that. But the research shows the best place for your child to get a great education is in a public school in Greenwood, South Carolina. That's what it says. You're going to have a fighter in this position. Yes, the legal definition for the state superintendent is to be the secretary for the Board of Education. The Board of Education for the state has no power over the superintendent. Also, to promulgate law into policy. That's fine and that's dandy. You need somebody who's going to stand up and say enough is enough. Enough of these standardized tests. I heard a young lady talk about English as a second language. This is what I want you to understand. Not only do we need to teach English as a second language to kids who do not understand English, but when they take these standardized tests, those tests are reading tests. And a lot of kids from poor backgrounds do not hear English, standard English, spoken in their homes. We need to make sure that every kid learns to read well, write well, do arithmetic. Every kid learns in our schools. This is my plan. It's called ACE, Academic Excellence. That every child through 6th grade needs to be taught like they're going to the best schools in South Carolina, United States. After 6th grade, they will be able to make a decision as to whether or not they want to be an astrophysicist or electrician. So in 7th grade through 12th grade, they have the ability to explore and see where they want to go. Not because the public education system crippled them, but because we equip them. The other plank in my platform is called community or local control. I am sick and tired of folk in Columbia, the General Assembly, our current state superintendent of education, and our governor thinking they can take away the rights of people in Greenwood, the right of people in Allendale not to select their own board of trustees. If you want to get rid of them, vote them out. Do not allow anybody to take your right. I say that because my father is a World War II veteran. And you all know World War II, when my dad taught, my dad happened to be African American. When my dad went overseas to fight, he was fighting for your right to vote. He did not have the right to vote. And I'd be darned if I'm going to let somebody take my right away to vote. There have been veterans out here that fought for our right to vote. Raise your hand if you're a veteran. We know what it's all about. And the second plank in my platform is educator, teacher pride. Yes, our teachers need to be paid more. I believe that we have a comprehensive forensic financial audit. We can start paying teachers $50,000 a year next year, not in the year 2030. We're wasting money in our public schools. The Self Center at Clemson did a study, and the study says you need a three-legged stool in order to run schools properly. One is income tax, property tax, and sales tax. You know what we did with Act 388? We got rid of operating schools with our property taxes. That held us hostage to a income tax. But this is the good news. The good news is, yes, the Republicans are in charge in the General Assembly, but I got better news. The better news is we're going to have to stop blaming the Republicans, and somebody's going to have to man up, woman up, and get on TV, go to jail if they have to, and say, we need to stop this illness. We need for every child to be educated in the state of South Carolina. And I believe that we can do that. And finally, as I stand here, I look out at this great audience, and I know this, because I've done some research on folk in this audience in our General Assembly, that you all do all you can in order to make sure that our children are educated. And I guarantee you, whatever you have given, whatever you have sent into the lives of others will certainly come back into your own life. It is about educating every kid in this state, because all children are our children. Red, yellow, black, white, regardless of their social economic status, their ethnicity, their sexual orientation, their race, their faith, they are our children. And if we don't fight for them, then we are going to be the losers. We need to stand up for American democracy. Again, thank you, Bill, for allowing me to come. Thank you for playing that clip. And when I say education, that we need to take action to make sure we have sensible, actionable firearm education. That's not the school issue. It is all of community. We are the society, and we have to stand up and do what needs to be done. But keep in mind, you need a fighter in this position. You don't need anybody that's going to mealy mouth and say, oh, we can't do. I know we can do. That's why I gave you my history. Poor children can learn. White children can learn. Black children can learn. Red children can learn. Yellow children can learn. And we have to demand that they learn. Thank you, Bill, for having me. Thank the Greenwood Party for allowing me to come down and to speak this morning. I think Ms. Ellis and I have to be at the same place in Greenville at some point. Amen. Amen.
We'll get some quick questions for you then, sir. Thank you very much.
Good morning.
Good morning, sir.
Thank you for coming. What would be your plans? Because my wife teaches, and the biggest problem she has is parental participation. And the other question is that I thought that Abbeville had a lawsuit before the state Supreme Court that was supposed to do something about that low funding, and I think it went to them. Do you know what happened with that? If you can't speak to it, maybe Senator Nicholson can shed some light on it.
Yeah, the senator may have more information than I have, but that lawsuit was settled, and we are now, according to the settlement of the lawsuit, reaping the benefits of that settlement. But of course, things are settled like they're always settled, and the folk who actually needed the help did not get the help. It was spread out so broadly across the state that it's not been felt in those particular areas. And your second question, sir? Parent participation. We have to look at parent participation differently. We have great parents, great teachers, and great schools. We have bad laws, and we have bad policy. Why should a teacher be reprimanded because of her tone as she raised her voice at somebody like me? That's crazy. We need to get rid of those laws. Why should a teacher, they're trying to control a boy like me in school, they walk over and put their hand on my shoulder and say, please sit down? Why would that ever end up in a lawsuit. We have pitted the family against the school, the teacher against the administrator. We have done that, and we blame it on everybody else. If we don't get these laws and these policies changed, we're in trouble. Now, with parental involvement, I say this simply from my own background. I'm a first generation college student. My parents didn't have time to come to school to see what was going on. They believed that the school was giving their very best to educate me. I still believe that today, that the school is giving its very best to educate every child. The problem is, again, we have turned the public school system against the community, and the community against the public school system. No public school teacher ought to worry about his job or her job because they're simply doing their job. My thing is this: if you cannot control a child, you cannot teach a child. And I'll just tell you, like the old folk told me, my mother, and she's dead and gone, I still believe she killed me from the grave. That if she couldn't take care of me, and I call 911, then I could go with 911, right? That's just the way it was in my home. And the same way in school. And I'll tell you a quick story. I have a lot of stories to tell because I've been in education a long time. And I say this because you need to know the demographic. I'm at D.R. Hill Middle School. Jill Sellers come to my office. Nice, petite, pretty little white female who's a teacher. She tells me that Delano will not take his hat off. Delano is an African-American male. He's about 6'3", weighs about 250 pounds. And I asked Miss Sellers, what do you say to him, and why did he not take his hat off? Because I can conceive of a kid in my building not obeying a teacher. That was just inconceivable to me. She said, well, I asked him very nicely to take his hat off. I said, oh. I said, tomorrow, when you see Delano, if you just stand on your tiptoes, you look him eyeball to eyeball, say, take your hat off, take it off now. She came to my office. The next day, she was smiling. How do you know that would work, Mr. Burgess? Because that's what his mother says to him. And when you said that to him, he knew you loved him. So that's my only point. We have bad laws, we have bad policy, and we have principals and superintendents and people, quite frankly, I apologize, who are making laws who don't really understand school. Schools are a place where we learn. Here's another example. And again, I have to do ethnicity. Pendleton High School, I had a teacher who had to be out long-term Southern. She was a Caucasian white female, and we hired a white female to sub. Keep in mind that kids will try to use the thing that's most different between the teacher and them to cause the issue. So, and these are kids who were white males. So their parents come, four of their parents come, and doctors, a wife, a lady who was a lawyer. They came and told me this lady did not like their sons. And I let them talk. And when the conversation was over, I said, do you know the gender of her children? They said no. I said, all her children are males. I said, is it not funny that she understands that your boys are trying to take over her class and she will not have it? They started packing their stuff and they left my office. Because you just have to call it out when you see it. And those boys thought they could have a wedge, and she don't like us because we're males. Silliness. She loved males because all her kids were male. Yes, I apologize. I get carried away sometimes.
Thank you for coming, Dr. Burgess.
Thank you for having me.
I have two questions. Number one is, I saw where South Carolina is 42nd in education in America, 42nd in education in America. Why is that so? And my second question is, how is no one responsible in the public schools, the principal and the teachers, for a kid getting to the 12th grade and can't read?
I'm going to answer the first question first. My research indicates that we're not really teaching kids to read, write, and arithmetic. We are concerned about everything else. There is a thing called social emotional learning. I'm on the county board in Anderson, South Carolina. We provide mental health counselors for every school in the county. But here's what I know. If you want to benefit a child socially and emotionally, the best way to do that is help that child achieve. And the only way you can help that child achieve is to hold that child to account by giving them what they need in the classroom. And when I say this, I know I may turn some people off, but so be it. When I was growing up, my mother and my grandmother knew nothing about social and emotional learning. When my mother married, my dad never ever put his hands on any of his children. And they didn't know all about these acronyms. This is what my grandmother said about us. This is the acronym she used. B-A-D. Bad. And sometimes you have to take action, understanding that a child may not have an emotional problem, they just may be maladjusted. So we don't educate kids. And then going back to the book I referenced by Derek Black, you need to read that book. He indicates this, that when the Northwest Ordinance was passed, predated the Constitution. Out west, if you've ever flown out west, you see these squares when you're going out west, that in every township there had to be a public school, because they understood that public education was the backbone of democracy. And it was not in the Constitution. So it is a federal responsibility also to educate children. But answering your question directly, I believe that we are afraid to educate every child. We tell children, you're competing with the kid over in town. You're really not. You're competing with the kid sitting beside you. And we need to make sure that every one of those kids understand that. But we are last and will forever be last until we come to this reality. I haven't looked at the research lately, but I'm going to stack it up for you. Here's who's at the bottom of the academic ladder when it comes to standardized tests. Black boys, black girls, Hispanic boys, Hispanic girls. The question is, what is it about how we're teaching those kids that cause them to be last? What can we do and how can we reframe what we're doing to make sure they're well educated? And the answer is, you teach the kid. You're not on a missionary journey when you go to school. You're not trying to convert somebody to Christianity. You're trying to teach them. And what we have done, we're really not teaching these kids. We need to actually teach them. Who cares if they say you're a racist? I don't care. I've been called a number of names by a number of kids. Who cares? This is what we're going to do in our school, and this is what we're going to do to educate you. We're going to make sure you're able to read, to write, and to do arithmetic. We'll let the house of faith take care of the house of faith stuff, but we'll teach you to read, write, do arithmetic. We'll make sure that you are educated academically, artistically, and athletically. We'll teach you to read, to write, and do arithmetic. In fact, I'm going to say this because it's old school. Do anybody remember what they call circle of reading? When you had to read something, and the person next to you had to read, and that was a great way of identifying who your non-readers were in school. We've gotten away from that now, and we need to go back to some of the basic things we did decades ago to bring our kids to where they need to be. And finally, I will be quiet. These standardized tests, we may need one or two, but tests should only be used if they're going to inform instruction. And we get tests when we've already prepared our school year. Standardized tests makes this assumption that human beings can be standardized, that students can be standardized. You cannot standardize students, you cannot standardize human beings. But what I do know is this, from my experience at Wolford: if you teach a kid well, give them a great education, they'll be able to pass any test, any day, at any time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Burgess.
Dr. Burgess, no disrespect.
Understood.
But you really didn't answer my question.
Okay, well, repeat your question.
My question was, how does a kid get from first grade to 12th grade and can't read in the 12th grade? And you just told me that public schools are the best schools in South Carolina. So can you explain to me and tell me, how does a kid get from first grade to 12th grade
gets a diploma, can't read, can't fill out a checkbook, but you say public schools are the best in South Carolina. I need you to explain that to me.
Okay, I apologize. I thought I answered your question. I'm going back to social emotional learning, and we're moving kids along because we don't want to in some way impair them, their sensibilities. The other research is that same phenomenon is happening in your public charter schools as well. So we have to make sure that students are learning, period, in our schools. Overall, that they are learning, that they are getting what they need in order to do well in the public schools. But I hear you, and I hear you well. That ought not be, it should not be. But we have to be more concerned about teaching the kid than whether or not the kid is going to like us, if that makes sense. But that's what's happening in our schools, and we need to stop that. But that's happening in charter schools, that's happening in the public school. But when I say our schools are great, when you compare schools to school, the public schools are outperforming, and this is objective data. They're outperforming charter schools, where charter schools are being held to the same standard. They're outperforming parochial schools if those schools are being held to the same standard. We don't know about private schools because private schools have not been held to those standards. But those other schools, the public schools, are outperforming those schools. And public schools, and I'll stand by our traditional public schools, are great schools, and we need to support those schools. But again, thank you all for having me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for the question, sir.